Hello, friends and colleagues. Welcome back. This is the Think Catalyst podcast. This is podcast number 12. I'm here with my business partner, Vivek Kuchibotla. Hello, Vivek. How are you?
Hello. How's Italy treating you? Good.
Okay, good.
It's a
We are
hard life.
we are coming from Italy today, where I'm here for a couple of weeks. Um, but good to be with you all. Last week we did a podcast over what we learned at Advertising Week Latam in Mexico City. Quite interesting. Lots of interesting learnings, lots of interesting observations. And we have another really good podcast today. As always, Vivek and I talk about everything that is important in the advertising business, but no one wants to talk about. And we think we have some interesting topics. Today, Vivek, we're going to do part two of more surprising things that we have learned in the last 2 years working together at Think Catalyst. So
Sure.
an interesting afternoon, evening for us here, and I think for our audience.
Before we get started, I just want to mention that at least 20 people came up to us at Adweek and said something along the lines of, "Hey, thank you for saying things that have to be said in the industry." And it was fun to hear that, because that's what we want to do, and it's good to know that at least some people are enjoying the podcast and are grateful that we're actually saying these things. So let's continue saying some more things like that.
In Latin America, they say sin filtro, no filters.
No BS.
No BS, which is
No
good.
BS.
I think it's important. We think it's important for the business, and the business is going through a lot of change, a lot of change in terms of technology, in terms of how we work, in terms of processes. And I think no BS is good. And hopefully it'll turn into better relationships, better ads, better overall work. So,
And we have fun doing it. So
yes, we do.
what's not to like?
Yes, we do. Terrific. Let's go on to the first point in this second part of more surprising things that we've learned over the last 2 years. And agencies and clients, advertisers, well, they're in a business relationship. And when the business relationship is good, magic happens. There's a lot of great things that come out of agency client relationships, but occasionally, and more often than we think, there are some bad relationships that happen. And one asks the question, who really bears the blame when an advertising agency and advertiser relationship doesn't work out? Vivek, you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I think as a default, the agency always is the one who takes the blame when things don't work out. And typically what the agency does is either switch people around on the account, or just get a lot of senior management involvement for a little while and hope the problem goes away. But the truth of the matter is that more times than not, the problem is coming from the client side. And if the problem is coming from the client side, there's really nothing that the agency can do to solve it in the mid and long term. So the surprising learning we've had is that a lot of times advertisers are causing their own problems with agencies, but they don't generally acknowledge that they're the cause of the problem.
You want
So
to
the
give some
agency is forced to
examples?
solve it.
The briefing process?
the briefing process. We've done a podcast about clients bullying agencies. We've done podcasts. We've talked about not properly giving feedback. We've talked about situations where there's an emergency. Emergencies always crop up. We never plan for emergencies, but emergencies always happen. And then you have clients that want to follow the same processes that they would have followed under normal circumstances in an emergency circumstance where you have less time, less money, or there's some external factor that's altering the process. And you really can't do that. You have to find a different way of doing things under an emergency. And if they're inflexible, it's going to blow up. It's going to end badly. And the agency is going to be blamed for it at the end. But it's not really the agency's fault.
Over
Over
the many years of leading ad agencies and media agencies, I've been through a couple of these. And there are occasions when the agency just, screwed it up. And there were many occasions when the client was just not doing the right thing. And a few clients actually went out of their way to make it difficult for the agency to do good work. This is like a marriage. This is like a friendship. This is like a family situation. It takes two to tango, and with proper communication and with the right focus, because if the focus is about doing great work, if it's about moving the business forward, if it's about addressing, what it is that the business needs for the business to grow, then I think that that's the right focus, and that's what will eventually turn it all around. Yes, there's opportunities to feedback properly, to be more efficient in the processes. Look, and then when there's bad work, and that's that. But most of the time, it's a two-way process, and fix it, address it, raise your hand and say, hey, we need to talk, time out to the client. And equally, the client should do the same with the agency if that's the same situation that they feel.
You got to establish the rules of engagement up front. If you enter into the relationship without clear rules of engagement, then when the problem happens, it's going to be the agency's fault, even if it isn't. As unfair as that sounds, that's reality. So set the rules up front.
That is a critical point. And that is establishing the expectations about how to work together and what you guys want to achieve, what the client and agency wants to achieve up front. Absolutely. And by the way, this is something that Vivek and I have done with agencies quite successfully, not to make it a selling point, but it is something that needs to be practiced and often is completely overlooked.
And when setting these rules of engagement, the agency needs to be honest. It needs to tell the truth. And the client needs to have an added, they need to be open to this. Because if it's all just fluff, it's not going to work. It has to be substantive and honest, and then it will work. So that was point number one.
Good. Would you like to take point number two?
Yes. This is one that I feel a lot of passion about. Agencies love to tell clients how to build brands, but when it comes to managing their own brand, agencies typically don't follow the same discipline. So what we're saying is that agencies don't practice what they preach about brand building to their clients. Give you a quick example. We've talked to a lot of agencies over the last 2 years, and we asked them what their point of difference is. And they got to think about it for a little while. And then sometimes they'll come up with a few different things, but it's very clear that they don't have it top of mind. And then you ask them, so who is your ideal prospect? And they'll always go for the big ones. But then you go a little bit deeper, and what sort of client are you looking to work with? And then they have to think about it a little bit more, which shows that they haven't thought about it and that they're disregarding two of the most basic tenets of brand building, which are know what your point of difference is, your unique selling proposition, one, and two, understand who your target audience is. And then number three is your message has to be consistent across all touch points when you communicate with your target audience. And they don't do that. They preach it, but they don't do it. From your perspective as an agency head, what would you say about that?
Critical, absolutely critical. We see agencies that are not doing well, that are not, are the ones that are not differentiating themselves, that are not building, they're building their profile properly to be identified. So, and we see it more and more. We see it more and more.
Here's maybe a simple test. You don't have to believe what we say, but just test it with your agency. Look at their website, see what stands out from the website. Go to their office, see what stands out. Ask yourself, is it consistent with what you saw on the website? If it isn't, there's a problem. And then go and look at their social media presence. Is it consistent with what they're promising in their website and they should be displaying in their office? If those three things are not consistent, they're not practicing what they preach.
And it seems that the focus is on where the similarities should be, whereas not as the differences should be. So
exactly. We've talk about points of difference.
We've seen it. And by the way, Vivek and I have also experienced in pitches that when the right credentials are presented at the very beginning, when the agency has a very clear profile of who they are, where they want to go, how they want to bring forward the work, they consistently become the front runners in pitches and often go on and win it. So food for thought.
Absolutely.
How
about you taking the next one? You suffered through what, 36 years of this? So you take this one.
Sure. One of the things that we've seen a lot, and even more as consultants, is the juniorization in the ranks of the advertiser and client side, as well as the agency, but especially in terms of who is leading the projects on the advertiser side. Often the chief marketing officer doesn't really step in at the beginning of a kickoff of an important project and hands off the work to junior people who then make a muck out of it, or potentially can make a muck out of it, because many of the poor results come out of a number of cascading situations that happen with junior people managing projects. And by the way, I will say that outright that the agency equally has a share in this situation, but probably acts and reacts a little bit faster earlier in the process to try to fix it. So, and there's a number of things that happen there, Vivek, and we've seen it. You want to comment on some of these?
Yeah, I do. I think you're being extremely fair. A client will never hesitate to tell you that your people in the agency are too junior or are not quite up to speed. But it works two ways, right? So the headline here for advertisers is, if you want better work, if you want it quicker, then rein in your junior marketing people. Because just as on the agency side, you might have people who are not ready for their job and are just mucking things up, you certainly have the same thing on the client side. It's very difficult for an agency to say this to their client. That's why we're saying it. But it's really important that clients understand that the one single thing they can do to improve the work of their agency is to get their junior people out of the way. There's an old saying, kids should be seen and not heard. Well, that applies to junior marketers as well. They should sit, listen, learn, not necessarily run these projects.
Here's our fourth point, big one, huge in my heart, Vivek. I'll mention this one and then you can roll on this one as well. And we saw this in it was one of our observations in Advertising Week last week in Mexico, and that is, where are the big ideas? Where have they gone? We're not seeing big ideas, big campaigns come out of agencies. We're seeing a lot of executions, a lot of work on different platforms, but they seem to be missing the essence of what the business is all about, which is to deliver an idea, a very focused idea around a brand, around a service that really allows it to stand out.
And doesn't change over time. Yeah. What we're seeing now, from my perspective, is a lot of little tactical stunts here and there. A lot of them are staged to use in social media, which is fine. But let's recognize them for what they are. They're little tactical stunts. They're not big ideas. They may win you an award. They may get you a little bump in your sales over the short term. But to build your brand over the long term, to build your business over the long term, you need the big idea. Yeah, you need the big idea. That's what advertisers should demand from their agencies, and that's what advertisers should actually be paying agencies the big bucks for, not the little stuff, the big stuff. That's what makes a difference.
What about purpose-driven campaigns, Vivek, or campaigns?
Well, I am of the philosophy that brands should keep quiet mainly about big issues that have nothing to do with their sphere of influence. So, a deodorant should talk about making you smell nice and not about saving the world. So
Right.
I have a very strong viewpoint on that. When you do save the world advertising, one, you're not saving the world. Let's agree that advertising is not that important in the grand scheme of things. And two, you're not building the brand. So what the hell are you doing? But that's just me. We could do, if you keep on goading me on this save the world thing, I could go off on an hour-long rant and completely sabotage the podcast, which I'm not going to do.
Some thoughts about big ideas. One, make it memorable. And that has to be probably on top of everything, because if it isn't memorable, you lose the audience right away, even if it's something that's important and that has a real proposition for the brand. So make the idea memorable. Two, make sure it has an insight. What does it say about the consumer? What does it say about how they use it? What does it say about how it works in their world that is relevant? Three, absolutely make it truthful. Do not engage into communication that is fuzzy and isn't necessarily about what the brand can do or can't do. Make sure that it's truthful, bring it out. And usually that goes par and parcel with the consumer insight as well. And then finally, and this is something that we've seen a lot, is make it we don't see a lot, is about the consistency and coherency of the idea across numbers of media, different media. So we see something outdoor that has nothing to do with what we see on social media or TV or whatever, and one begins to see how message dilution rapidly takes place and the brand really doesn't stand for anything.
I'd add one more thing. I'd add set up a process where you can manage failure, because it would be a lie to say that you're going to land on the big idea the first time around, or even the second, or the third, or the fourth. It might take you 10 tries. It might take you more than that. But once you land on the big idea, it'll be worth it, because you'll be writing that big idea for years and years and years. But you have to fail before you get there, and you have to be able to manage the failure productively. You don't fire the agency, you don't fire the brand manager, you just learn and you try it again.
You bring up an interesting point, because it dovetails into my next point, which is, or the next point that we learned over the last couple of years, and that is, that has all about to do with experimenting and with innovation. And what you just said is really right, which is, try fast, fail fast, learn fast, and that is part of the process of doing better work and understanding how brands work better, in terms of the whole communication scheme and work that they do. So, interesting point. I had a boss once, Vivek, in my early days. I recommended a test market for a brand that I was working on. It was my very first assignment. And I remember my boss didn't want me to do that. And the client said, no, let's go ahead and try. The client said this, and my boss would not have anything to do with this. And finally, the boss overruled us and overruled my boss and said, yeah, let's try Rick's idea. It turned out that 6 months later, nothing was happening. It didn't work. And we sat down with the client, and my boss used to say, you see, it didn't work, and it wasn't useful, and we wasted 6 months. And the client actually said, I probably knew it wasn't going to work from the very beginning, but I like the fact that I have an agency that can push me, that can bring new things. And I think we did learn something out of this. And we learned that these are the things that we shouldn't be doing going forward in the brand. So I thought it was really neat. My client supported me more than my boss. I learned from the whole process, and it seemed like a lot of fun. A little scary.
I think
I thought at some point, I said, oh God, I want to get fired for this. And it wasn't it. So
I think it's important to highlight here that you gotta try things and learn from them. And there's a certain stubbornness within the world of agencies, that they cling to things that don't work, but they seldom try new things. I'll give you a quick example. This morning we had a conversation with an agency that's just launching in the market, and we mentioned to them that most credentials presentations basically say the same thing. And much to our surprise, for the first time probably in 200 conferences we've had with agencies, they said, yeah, we're aware of it, and we're trying to figure out how we change our credentials to focus more on our point of difference, which is something that we've been preaching constantly. But this is actually the first time that the agency proactively is working on that already, right? Most agencies will say our credentials are fine, and they're not important anyhow. And they're missing out on huge opportunities just because they stubbornly stick to things that don't work.
And
we could look at other examples.
This is an agency with, top #1 partners up there who are tried and true and have done very well in the past, and they're starting over again. So, and they kept saying, we haven't learned enough. We can keep on learning. So that's really good. That's really cool. I thought it was super interesting.
Absolutely.
We're going to go to the last point, which is, for me, it's a no-brainer, but again, one of those things that agencies sort of completely overlook as part of their growth strategies. Vivek, go ahead. This one's another one of your hot buttons as well.
Hey, I've been saying this for a long time. Agencies spend a lot of money on new business, and they're willing to accept success rates that are really not very high. They've just come to believe that, a 15% success rate is good because that's where the average is. So what that really means is that out of every 100 new business pitches that they're involved in, they lose 85 of them. So it's really not a winning proposition. But anyhow, they keep going with new business, spend a lot of money. They never, ever spend any money on retaining existing clients. And it's much easier to retain an existing client. It's much more profitable to retain an existing client. And the more existing clients you retain, the less you have to stretch on new business, because the amount of money that you have to make up, the amount of revenue that you have to make up is lower. So,
and new business, Vivek,
agencies,
is such a unknown world. You don't know who you're going to be talking to. Whereas retaining existing clients, you already know them. You've been working with them for some time. Maybe it needs a reset. Maybe it needs a refresh. But retaining existing clients is much more efficient going forward.
And normally clients, when they're frustrated with the agency, they're telling you what the problem is, or at least their version of the problem. But at least you have something to work with, to fix. When you're in pure new business, you have no idea of what the real problem is. You have very limited contact with your prospect. So the odds are higher on fixing a problem than landing a new piece of business. And this doesn't take into account the time factor, because winning a piece of new business, you might be doing it today and that new business will hit the P&L next year.
Right.
Or 6 months down the line. And for 6 months, there is no revenue. So if you retain a client that is generating revenue today, it is a much better deal than betting on winning a client that might give you 15% chance of success, some revenue 6 months down the line. It's a no-brainer, but agencies have kind of accepted that a small percentage or X% of their business will be lost every year, and there's not a damn thing they can do about it. And I think they're absolutely wrong.
Fix the leaky bucket. Fix the leaky bucket.
Absolutely.
All right, let's
I got to throw in an analogy. Because I always do analogies in these podcasts, right? Here's a sports analogy. If you're playing soccer, you will never lose. You will never lose a game if you don't let the other side score a goal. So it's the same thing with existing business. If you never lose an account, you're in good shape.
Outstanding.
So much for my analogy.
So those are all the points that we wanted to discuss today. Interesting points, more surprising and interesting things that we've learned over the last 2 years. Some concluding thoughts, Vivek?
The more I think about it, the more I'm convinced that these surprising things that we're talking about have been there all the time. It's mostly common sense. But for some reason, agencies either don't want to address these issues or are afraid to address them. And because they don't, nothing changes. But we're not coming up with huge insights here. But we are saying things that need to be said and that no one is willing to say. If you
And,
do
and your
identify the
clients
problem,
are-
the fix is not hard.
And your clients are not gonna, they may point them out, but they're not really going to focus too much on that. Their focus is on the results. And if they don't get the results, for them, the quicker answer is change the agency and move on. So a lot of it, I call it a lot of the basics and the fundamentals. If you think about it, they're not really that hard to fix either. You do need to spend some time. You do need to focus on them. And sometimes you need someone from the outside to help you clarify and have the vision for that as well.
Yep. Blocking and tackling the basics.
All right.
Always important.
Audience, friends, colleagues, thanks again for joining us. If you like our podcast, please subscribe, please like us, please share us. Our business is about improving the entire advertising process between clients and agencies. Our slogan is better relationships equals better results. And we're very much dedicated to that. Thank you for joining us this week. We will be back next week with another interesting podcast and hope to see you then. Thank you very much. Good night, Vivek from Italia.
Good night. Good night, everybody. See you soon.
Buonanotte.
Buonanotte.